This week on Bullshift the podcast, I speak with Dr. Moira Somers, who is the author of the book Advice That Sticks, and she is also an expert on behavior change. So we talk about how people need to maybe be a little bit more uncomfortable to do what they need to do what is better for them, and what advisors can do to help motivate their clients, because you cannot impose motivation to do things that are in their own interest and for their own reasons. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Bullshift the podcast. This is the podcast that talks about the financial services industry and how it shifts your attention to make you feel more bullish. My name is John DeGuy. I'm the host of the podcast and the author of the book, Bullshift. My guest this week is Dr. Moira Somers. She is a leading practitioner in the field of financial psychology and financial change. She's a neuropsychologist and an executive coach. She blends science with practical advice giving, and she is the author of the book, Advice That Sticks. Moira, how are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. It's spring. How can you be grumpy?
Exactly, and it's unfortunate because as we tape this on a bright and sunny Thursday morning, my Maple Leafs are still in the playoffs and your Jets have been eliminated. So I'm sorry to have to begin on that unfortunate note. Can you begin, Moira, by maybe just sharing a very quick moment about your background, how you came to be a person who does what you do, and why you're interested in financial advice?
Sure. I have always been interested in what makes it harder or easier for people to follow through with their best intentions for their lives, including what makes it harder or easier for them to follow through with professional advice that might contribute to a better life for them. And so in my doctoral research on procrastination and in my work as a neuropsychologist and professor, I really dove into the issue of implementation and looked at this in just a variety of areas. Eventually, I was asked by people within financial services if I could take some of the same science about non-adherence and bring it to bear on the problem of financial behavior. And it turns out there's so many similarities, John, between the difficulties in following medical advice, say, and the difficulties in following financial advice. And so it was just a natural fit to start delving into that area.
It's funny because one of the things, if you are in the business of giving professional advice, one of the frustrations, and my wife is a lawyer, and one of the frustrations that a lot of professionals have, so it's not just doctors, it goes throughout the professions, is giving good advice and then not being able to get your client or patient to take it and not following through. And a lot of these people don't follow through, not because they're nefarious, they have good intentions, but for whatever reason, they're human and they don't necessarily make it all happen the way you would like it to, or the way the textbook says it ought to.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you talk about in Advice That Sticks is beginning by meeting people where they are and understanding why they're in the room with you in the first place. Why are you here, above and beyond the very obvious things? What if you could maybe take a moment to explain why that's important?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the challenge is that people often aren't able to even articulate why they're there. Or to put it another way, sometimes the things that we're looking for when we seek professional advice aren't the overt ask. I mean, really what we're looking for is confidence, right? A reduction in complexity. We want somebody else to take over the heavy of, pouring through those law journals, for example, or going to medical school, so that we don't have to do that. And so often people show up in a kind of passive way, asking for help in getting to their goals, but because they haven't had the training that the advisor has had, they don't quite know what it might look like to get there. So mostly, the hidden things that people are looking for fall under the category of wanting to feel something different, so that they can go on to do something different.
And if you want to feel something different, but you feel some cognitive dissonance toward what you're being prescribed. So, come help me, come, doctor, I want to lose weight, but well, what you need to do is eat better and exercise. Okay, I want to lose weight, but I don't want to eat better and exercise. I want to continue to have my pizza. So, the question then becomes one of, how do you help motivate people who know they ought to be doing what you're asking them to do, but for whatever reason, it's almost like it's a placebo, because there's a certain amount of, if you ask, that you think you're entitled to just be better because I've taken the step of asking, but they don't want to do the heavy lifting themselves. They want to do it as long as they don't have to have a lifestyle change of their own.
So that's, I think you're hitting on something super important. The problem is that as an advice giver, what can then happen is that you get caught up in a circle of judgment and almost disdain, and you lose a working alliance. So, if you were trained as a vet, I don't think you'd be grumpy if a dog snarled at you. You would just understand this is what dogs do. And you would have things in place to keep yourself and the pet safe while you're doing what you need to do. But for people who are trained to give advice to humans, there is often a shocking lack of training around actually dealing with the humanity of that person, including the fact that behavior change is unbelievably hard. It can be hard just to initiate it, but it is devilishly difficult to sustain it. And what I talk about in my book, what I start with in my book, is actually not the client. I start with the advice giver. What is it that we need to know about why behavior change is hard, and how should that be woven into our service delivery if we hope to help people reach their goals? Because technically sound advice, frankly, is just table stakes. It's the ticket to ride, but it does not get you to your destination.
And the human touch that you talked on a moment ago is the sort of thing that I think people are a lot more likely to take advice if they feel that the person giving it understands them and is somehow invested in the in the welfare of the person and really wants the person to do well. So I
Mhm.
think that's really, it's fascinating. I'm wondering if you know anything, and you may not, but how good are advice givers at changing their own behavior? I know that in the 1960s, when the American Surgeon General came out with the advice that cigarette smoke caused cancer, there were more cigarette smokers among the U.S. physicians than there were among the general U.S. population. And it took a very long time for these professionals who were giving the advice to deal with the cognitive dissonance of what they were doing with what they were professing to do based on their Hippocratic oath. And they had to change their own behavior.
Mhm.
Do you know anything about that too? How good are the people giving the advice at changing their own behavior?
Not any better than anybody else.
Mhm.
Everybody has a history. Everybody has competing demands on time and attention and energy. Um, we may, and each one of us, John, you included, me included, we cherry pick what advice we're going to take. I just got a notion, an email from my office this morning saying that that we need to shut down our computer every night, like turn it off. And my first response was, that is sound advice from a cybersecurity expert. And my first human response to that was to reject it, because that could slow me down 30 seconds every day. I don't want to be slowed down 30 seconds every day. I mean, it's ridiculous. Something, that my first response is resistance. And yet I've worked, this is not my first rodeo. I've worked through other areas of resistance before and know that you just, settle down, look at things on its merits, put things in perspective. look at long-term advantages versus short-term disadvantages, all these things. And I will shut off my computer every day. But it was just really interesting to me that that was my first response for something. I mean, that's nothing. And then you look at stuff like advice to invest for the future, to give somebody money with an uncertain outcome, no guarantee, when I could use that money right now. What is going to allow me to do that hard thing?
Yeah.
So I think it helps, again, if we know the creature we're dealing with, if we understand what it is to be human, and if we're willing to be humble enough that the technical advice we give, it has to be sound. And my goodness, we've got to go and do the CE credits, and we've got to be constantly developing and keeping up. But that's only half of it. If we don't know how to give advice in such a way that it meets people where they are, it touches on their hearts and minds. If we don't know what has got in the way in the past, and why haven't they been able to do this before? Eat less, exercise more. Is there something wrong with the technical nature of that advice? Some people would say yeah. But let's say it's true. Then it would be foolish of any practitioner to just give that advice and then think they've done their job. Nobody can take that advice without lots of examination about how will they eat less, when will they exercise more, what will they do when they're traveling, what will they do when it's a family meal, what will they do when they are exhausted at the end of the day, what does that translate to at the grocery store?
Okay, so when you do that, what about, are there any hacks that you can actually recommend in terms of what you can do to help people constructively, positively, to change their behavior, to make sure that people are following through and doing what they are presumably committing to doing?
Mm-hmm. First of all, you can find out whether they're actually in agreement with your advice.
Right. Yeah.
Which very few of us ever do, right? Like, I am the expert and you should listen. So we may be expert in our field, but they're the expert on their life. They're the expert on their bandwidth. They're the expert on whether anybody that's really important to them is going to be in opposition to it. Lots of times couples leave financial advisors' offices, and then they have a big fight in the parking lot. And the advisor hasn't drawn out the quieter member, doesn't really know why things have gone a little chilly in the room, is maybe a little scared to go to rush in where angels fear to tread. So he or she has no idea what's going on in their hearts and minds. They don't. So really finding out, does this fit for you? How does this resonate? And then finding out, have you ever tried to do anything like this in the past? What might have interfered? What facilitated it? If you were to do this thing, how would it benefit you? There are all these questions that come out of the field of motivational interviewing that help us to understand what people are ready for. And then once you figure that out, really what you want to do is, especially for people who struggle with procrastination, help them identify the smallest possible step that they can do to get on board with this behavior change, and then help them do that, and then rinse and repeat.
Which is the James Clear and the Atomic Habits sort of idea of, find out what you can do and then just keep on building from that.
Mm-hmm.
You think about how behavior can change and what is required to make it change. And what you were just saying a moment ago reminded me of a story. I have a former colleague who was once doing a blue sky, tell me about what the future looks like with a husband and wife. And one said, well, I want to, the guy said, I want to play golf or whatever else. And the woman said, well, we want to travel. And it became obvious that that the two of them had never really talked about what retirement would look like. And in the end, the couple broke up because, I mean, there's probably more going on under the surface than just
Yeah.
that. But at any rate, as a legend would have it, that was the catalyst that caused people to reflect upon what they wanted, and what am I doing, but also why am I doing it?
Mhm.
And if you can get people to do it for where they are, because some people are motivated by playing golf 3 times a week. Other people could not care less and they want to travel, and neither is right or wrong. But if you can meet them where they are and tie their own personal goals to why it is that we need you to save another $150 a month than you're saving right now, that might help them to actually do it. It's one of those little nudges, and I call them hacks that you can do to get people to move further.
Mhm.
In your experience, what is I've heard you mention procrastination 3 or 4 times already. In your experience, what are the maybe 1 or 2 biggest obstacles to get people to change their behavior? Well, if there were 1 or 2 things that a person giving advice could do to motivate people to follow through when they hadn't previously, perhaps other people giving advice had tried and failed, how do you crack the nut and get things moving forward?
Yeah, it's so hard to impose motivation.
Yeah.
It's really, it's drawing out, finding out what's important to them, and then recognizing that no matter how motivated you are, that motivation is going to lag. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's the nature of the beast. And so figuring out, is there something, might there be one thing that we could do now that would shore up or make irrelevant future motivation? So the thing, here's an example that most financial advisors do. They have assigned forms that make sure that that money comes out of the bank account every month automatically, so that we don't have to be motivated to do it. We don't have to be every month when the time comes around. We don't have to remember to do it. We don't have to schedule it. It just happened. And that's a great gift that technology offers us, is the ability to set it and forget it until such a time as you need to modify it. So that is one thing that, I look for all the time as hacks in my own life. Like, what can I do so that I will get this thing done? I will remember it even when I don't feel like it, not in a way that removes my autonomy. If I want to cancel, if I don't want to go in the gym in the morning and I've slept in my gym clothes, I still don't have to go to the gym in the morning, but I have removed one of the barriers to getting there. So looking for those kinds of things that initially you find out what does motivate people. And that is what allows them to embark on the initial behavior change, John. But then you need to look at who's in your court, what, all of these other things. What will make this fun? What will make this satisfying? What will make it less aversive to do? There are certain things we know that torpedo any advice in any domain. And if we can address those factors that tend to derail most of us, then we are doing our job as advisors. I like to think of all advisors, no matter what profession, my mechanic, my
Right.
cybersecurity guy that I'm grumpy with this morning. I like to think of them and us as implementation partners.
That's the word, the phrase implementation partner is one that I had not heard before, but I like it and I can see how it would work. I also love that you said that you can't impose motivation. That is something that, because I'm always struggling with, well, how do I get people to, and the fact of the matter is you can't make them do anything. They, hopefully they will see that this is the right thing to do for their own reasons, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe they won't. And yeah.
I think external stuff is compelling, right? Like, I mean, this is what drives the whole criminal justice system. We will punish you if you don't, or we will reward you if you do. But the fact is that the effects of punishments and incentives decay quite reliably over time. And so we have to be creative in figuring out how will we tweak those things. And it's just exhausting. So as much as I can, I like to really lean into the field of behavioral economics and look at what are the defaults, where's the friction, how can we eliminate it. There's so much benefit that can come from that, and from working on the client advisor relationship, that that incentives and rewards often just kind of pale in comparison. It's not that they're not important, but they're not as important as some of these other things.
Yeah, the phrase that Richard Thaler uses is libertarian paternalism, helping people to make whatever decisions they want, but without imposing. Because as you say, you can't impose. You can make it easy and make it more likely that they will do what is likely to be in their own best interest. But remove the friction, make it easy, but do not impose anything. People still have to choose for themselves.
Yeah, don't take away people's rights.
Yep, we agree. So let's talk about maybe the beginning of a meeting, the first 3-4 minutes of a meeting, and the last 3-4 minutes of a meeting, because that's what a lot of people remember when they meet with someone who gives them advice. They remember, not just the warm smile and the firm handshake, but there are things that you can say at the beginning and the end of a meeting. And one of the things that you mentioned in the book was at the beginning of a meeting, you should start with questions like, what would make our time together the best use of your energy and of your money? And so asking open-endedly for people to tell you what's on their mind and what their sore spot is, that helps, right? Doesn't it?
Absolutely. What brings you in today? Sometimes it would seem to be so self-evident. Somebody's called you, Dr. Somers, I'm really depressed. I need therapy for depression. I despite knowing that ahead of time, I'm not going to launch into a treatment protocol for depression. I want to know what's top of mind, top of heart right now, today. And obviously I will work back to what it was what are these other things that I know about you from what you've told me. But people really want to be respected in that. And some folks are super intimidated by professionals. And so they may kind of freeze at open-ended questions. So even asking things like, have you ever met with somebody like me before? How did that go? There's no manual that will allow you to bypass the development of your own emotional intelligence. You're just gonna have to do that. And sometimes you'll make mistakes and sometimes you'll step in it. But that's why we were given those lovely phrases. I seem to have made a misstep here. I'm sorry. Can we start again? Can I take a mulligan? And go back to what it is they're hoping for.
And then at the end of the meeting, the same sort of thing. I think it's usually wise to close the loop and say things like, so you came here and you said you wanted to deal with this. Have we answered your questions? Is there anything else on your mind? And allowing people to have the opportunity to clear the air if you misunderstood, and to do the Columbo thing. One last thing, if there's something else that's on their mind that for whatever reason hasn't been uncovered yet.
And one of the things that I always put in those, and I usually do it actually about 10 minutes before the end of the scheduled time, because it's just so easy to assume that you nailed it. And I want to make sure that I've given lots of time just in case I haven't, or that the client may have actually moved on in the course of meeting with me, that they realize that the thing they were so worried about actually isn't the thing, or they're confident we've dealt with the thing and now there's this other thing. So in those last 10 minutes, I do say, did we accomplish what you came here for? But then, is there anything that's been talked about that's left you feeling unhappy, uncertain, concerned? If you were, did we identify a path forward that you're pleased with? What are you understanding? If I've given them specific advice, I always ask them to state in their own words what it is that I've suggested they do and why, right? I make sure they understand the why. And then I figure out, what's going to get in your way. There's always stuff that's going to get in our way. And so maybe I've given advice that is patently ridiculous given their life circumstances. Sometimes you find out that people are, they can't begin to do what you've done. If they do it, they will end their marriage. If they do it, they will create chaos in the life of an adult child whom they've been supporting, but they haven't let you know they've been supporting. So these are all of the contextual things that we have to bring out in order to make sure that our advice really is solid and suited for purpose.
Great. So let's end the main interview with that. And once again, your book is Advice That Sticks. It's been around now for 7 or 8 years. And it's a great resource for people like me who give advice to retail investors and people who need financial planning advice, because it helps us to follow things through and to make sure things actually get done. I like to always end the podcast with 2 things. And the first is something that I call That's Bullshit. And That's Bullshit is where I ask my guests to point out something that they think is wrong with the way people give advice. And do you have anything that you would want to point to?
Yeah, I'd say the main thing I would like to point to is advisors' optimism bias, that they have nailed it for the client without actually having checked out that assumption.
Wow. Well, the big subtext of bullshit, of course, is how optimism bias threatens your finances. So thank you for saying that. I've never thought of it quite that way, but that's wonderful. Let's move on now to Shift Happens. If it was up to you, what would Moira Somers do to help advisors overcome the optimism bias of the advice they give when they meet with their clients?
Simply to ask some of those other questions, those disconfirming questions that just take a few extra minutes in a session, but can make all the difference in the world in terms of whether a client feels understood and whether that advice stands, a snowball's chance of getting implemented or not. If we could just check our own optimism bias and assumptions at the gate with a couple of extra questions, that would be super.
Fantastic. Thank you, Moira. It was wonderful speaking with you today. I want to wish you all the best, and maybe our paths will cross again down the road.
That'd be lovely. Take good care. Bye-bye.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager in Toronto and the author of the book Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. Bullshift is available online and in bookstores everywhere. The opinions expressed in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Bullshift, the podcast, is produced by TalkShoe, a division of IOTM.